It began on the quiet streets of northern England. A figure in the dark, a sudden blow, and then nothing but silence. For years, fear crept through city after city. Women vanished, lives were shattered, and whispers turned to headlines. The police launched one of the largest manhunts the country had ever seen. But no matter how close they came, the killer stayed just out of reach. Until one night, by pure chance, it all unraveled. This is the story of a man who hid in plain sight, and the deadly cost of what was missed. Welcome to Unveiled Crime Mysteries channel, where I unveil mysterious true crimes, some lost to time, others fresh in memory. Justice might not be served, but the shadow is unveiled. This is 1970s Yorkshire, a place of crumbling mill towns, soot streaked brick, and rows of terraced houses under grey skies. The streets hum with industry by day, but at night they fall quiet, uneasy, waiting. In these mist-shrouded streets, something is stirring. A man, ordinary, forgettable, invisible. Peter William Sutcliffe. Born in 1946, in the small town of Shipley, West Yorkshire, the son of Kathleen and John Sutcliffe. His father a violent drinker, prone to smashing bottles, his rages scarring the family in ways no one would see. His mother, battered and afraid, tried to shield the children, but the damage seeped in. As a boy, Peter was quiet, withdrawn, a loner. But behind the silence, something darker brewed. By adolescence, he had developed an obsession with watching, lurking in the shadows to spy on women, especially prostitutes and their clients. Not just curiosity, fascination, fixation. He left school at 15, drifting through menial jobs. Among them gravedigger, a job where death was part of the routine. Cowworkers remembered his unnerving excitement, his macabre jokes, his willingness to spend long, late hours among the dead. By the early 1970s, he was married to Sonia, a schoolteacher with her own battles, including schizophrenia. On the surface, he was a husband, a worker, a man behind the wheel of a heavy goods vehicle, crisscrossing northern England. But beneath that surface, Peter Sutcliffe was slipping further away from the world most people saw, and into the nightmare no one was prepared to face. Peter Sutcliffe's first known attack came quietly, almost unnoticed. It was 1969, Bradford. He approached a woman, a sex worker, and with a stone tucked into a sock, he struck. He slipped back into the night, leaving her battered but alive. No one knew his name. No one knew this was only the beginning. For years the violence simmered under the surface. Then in July 1975, it surged again. Tracy Brown, just 14 years old, walking alone near her home in Silsden. A man approached her, charming, even kind. He offered to walk with her, make sure she was safe, and then he attacked. 5 blows to the head, hard and fast, before running off when car headlights swept the lane. Tracy survived barely, but her attacker's name would stay buried for years. In October that same year, the nightmare claimed its first life. Wilma McCann, 28, a mother of 4. She was last seen walking near her home in Leeds, late at night. Sutcliffe struck her twice with a hammer, dragged her into a playing field, and stabbed her 15 times. Her body was found the next morning, just yards from where her children slept. Police launched a massive investigation, 150 officers, 11,000 interviews, but no arrest came. There was no clear suspect, no pattern they could see. The city exhaled in tension. waiting, hoping it was an isolated horror. But Peter Sutcliffe was only just beginning. In January 1976, Emily Jackson, 42, was killed. In May, Marcella Claxton was attacked on her walk home from a party. 4 months pregnant at the time, she would survive the hammer blows, but lose her baby. Each victim left shattered lives behind, families grieving, survivors struggling to make sense of the brutality. And across Yorkshire, women watched the news with a rising sense of dread, wondering if they might be next. The police scrambled, the public panicked, but Sutcliffe, he just vanished back into his life, back behind the wheel, back to his wife, and still, he was free to strike again. By 1977, the death toll had risen, and the pattern had shifted. Until now, the police had viewed the killings through a narrow lens. Sex workers, high-risk women, working late hours on dangerous streets. But Peter Sutcliffe was about to shatter that illusion. Jane MacDonald was just 15 years old, a cheerful, smiling girl from Leeds, described by her family as bright, lively, and kind. On the night of June 25, 1977, Jane missed her last bus home. She decided to walk, cutting through a familiar neighborhood. Somewhere on that quiet walk, Peter Sutcliffe found her. Hammer blows to the head, stabs to the chest and back, a broken bottle driven into her body. When her body was found, the public recoiled. This was no longer just sex workers. This was every woman, every daughter, every sister. The media exploded. Fear swept the streets of Leeds, Bradford, Manchester. Women refused to walk alone. Shops closed early. Neighborhoods fell into silence after dark. But Jane wasn't the first, nor would she be the last. Irene Richardson, February 1977, murdered in Roundhay Park, her body left brutally mutilated. Jan Jordan, October 1977, attacked in Manchester, her body hidden and revisited by Sutcliffe days later in a grim attempt to recover a traceable £5 note. The outrage was mounting, but the investigation was already slipping off course. In 1978, a letter arrived at the West Yorkshire Police Headquarters, then another, then a cassette tape. The sender called himself Jack. The letters were taunting, cruel. The tape, even worse. A man's voice, thick with a Wearside accent from the Sunderland area, mocking detectives, belittling their efforts, hinting at his next moves. For the exhausted detectives leading the biggest manhunt in British history, it was a lightning strike. They pivoted north. Hundreds of officers redeployed, thousands of resources drained into a wild goose chase. They listened to local accents, set up roadblocks, interviewed countless men. They were sure they were looking for a man from Sunderland, but they weren't. The man on the tape wasn't Peter Sutcliffe. He wasn't the Yorkshire Ripper. He was a hoaxer, later identified, decades later, through DNA as John Humble, an unemployed alcoholic from the Ford estate. His lies cost investigators 18 crucial months. And in that time, Peter Sutcliffe killed 3 more women. While detectives chased a phantom voice, the real killer was right in front of them. Pulled over, questioned, interviewed 9 separate times, and every time let go. They were chasing a copycat, while the real killer lived in plain sight. It was a cold, ordinary night in Sheffield. 2 police officers, Robert Hydes and Robert Ring, patrolled the red light district, watching for stolen cars, petty crimes, disturbances. They spotted a brown Rover parked in a driveway near Light Trade's house. A man sat inside, a young woman beside him. A check of the plates revealed they were false. Peter Sutcliffe was arrested on the spot, on suspicion of car theft. At first glance it seemed minor, another small-time offense in a troubled area. But in the hours that followed, things began to unravel. When asked to relieve himself, Sutcliffe was allowed to slip away behind an oil tank. Unseen by officers, he discarded a hammer and knife he'd hidden in his jacket. He returned, calm, cooperative. But back at the station, a hunch gnawed at Sergeant Robert Ring. Why had Sutcliffe gone behind that tank? They returned to the arrest site, searched the area, and there in the snow and dirt, they found the hammer and knife. A search warrant was issued. At Sutcliffe's home, more weapons were found, and in the police station, as they stripped him for evidence, officers uncovered something deeply unsettling. He was wearing an upside-down V-neck jumper under his trousers, arms pushed through the leg holes, crotch exposed, elbows padded, a crude sexual outfit designed for kneeling over victims. The pieces clicked together, and after years of fear, frustration and failure, the Yorkshire Ripper was finally caught. In the interrogation room, Peter Sutcliffe sat quietly. He did not beg. He did not deny. He simply confessed. Over hours of calm, emotionless questioning, Sutcliffe laid out his crimes. One by one, he spoke of the hammer, the knife, the screwdriver. He described the attacks, the panic, the blood, and then the reason. He believed God had sent him on a mission to cleanse the streets of prostitutes. He saw himself as a tool of divine punishment, a judge delivering death. But even as he catalogued his horrors, there was one moment when his composure cracked. One victim, one name, brought something close to regret. Jane MacDonald, 15 years old, the schoolgirl who had been walking home, the girl who didn't fit his mission. To all the others, he showed no remorse, no shame, no sorrow. By the time the sun rose over Yorkshire the next morning, the monster that had haunted the north of England for 5 long years was behind bars. But the nation's reckoning had only just begun. The eyes of the nation fixed on the man they called the Yorkshire Ripper. Peter Sutcliffe stood in the dock, head bowed, eyes downcast, as his lawyers presented a defense of diminished responsibility. He was not a calculating murderer, they argued, but a man in the grip of paranoid schizophrenia, hearing voices, believing he was commanded by God to kill. 4 psychiatrists backed the claim, but Justice Sir Leslie Boreham was unconvinced. The judge, cautious and exacting, demanded a jury trial, refusing to accept the insanity plea without testing the evidence before the public. The nation watched as the details poured out: the hammer attacks, the knives, the screwdriver wounds, the grotesque injuries, the cold calculation. Families of the victims packed the courtroom. Some wept quietly, others stared at Sutcliffe in disbelief, wondering how this small, unremarkable man had shattered so many lives. Reporters described him as detached, almost absent, a man who showed flickers of regret only when the murder of Jane MacDonald, the innocent schoolgirl, was mentioned. When the verdict came, it was swift and crushing. Guilty. 13 counts of murder, 7 counts of attempted murder. Justice Boreham declared Sutcliffe beyond redemption and sentenced him to 20 life sentences, later converted to a whole life order, meaning he would never leave prison. But the story didn't end there. Decades later, with the advent of DNA technology, a shocking twist emerged. One murder long linked to the Yorkshire Ripper, that of Joan Harrison in Preston, in 1975, was re-examined. The evidence cleared Sutcliffe. The real killer, it turned out, had been another man, Christopher Smith, a convicted sex offender, who had died even after his trial. The shadows of Peter Sutcliffe's crimes stretched on, raising new questions, reopening old wounds, and leaving a legacy of pain that rippled far beyond the courtroom. In the months following Peter Sutcliffe's conviction, the British government ordered a full investigation into what had gone wrong. Why had the largest manhunt in British history failed to stop a man they had interviewed 9 times? Why had survivors' voices been overlooked, clues missed, lives lost? The result was the Byford Report, an uncompromising document that exposed the deep, systemic failures inside West Yorkshire Police. Ignored leads, misfiled reports, an overwhelming dependence on paper records, and at the heart of it all, a culture of sexism, an attitude that sex workers were somehow less deserving of protection, less urgent to save. The report reshaped policing across Britain. New investigative procedures were introduced. Information handling was modernized. Training on victim care and bias was strengthened. The Yorkshire Ripper case became a grim textbook, a lesson in how not to hunt a killer. But for the survivors, and for the families left behind, no policy could erase the scar. Women like Marcella Claxton and Maureen Leah, who survived Sutcliffe's attacks, would carry the trauma for life, their injuries visible and invisible. Communities across the north of England were left to reckon with the fear and grief Sutcliffe had sown. And women everywhere, who had been told to stay home, to stay safe, asked the same question. Why was the responsibility to survive placed on them, and not on the man who hunted them? The Yorkshire Ripper case did more than haunt Britain, it changed it. But for many, that change came too late. The Yorkshire Ripper case stands as a grim testament, a testament to systemic failure, to misogyny buried deep within institutions meant to protect, to the peril of misplaced trust. When warning signs are ignored and voices go unheard, 13 women murdered, 7 more brutally attacked, a nation gripped by fear, a police force overwhelmed, and at times blind to the truths staring them in the face. Do you believe justice was truly served? Could something like this happen again? We want to hear from you. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinions, your questions, your anger, your grief. And if this story gripped you, if you want more deep, unflinching true crime storytelling, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Until next time, there's always another case to be unveiled.